Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next edition of our EduSmart Professional Development Series. Thank you all for joining us after your nice busy workday and your Wednesday evening with us as we're heading into our hot summer days slowly. I don't know where you all are at, but this is my first Texan summer and it's warm. But welcome to our presentation today. We have Paula Noe presenting on data responsive instruction. But before I give the stage off to Paula, I just wanted to take a moment to properly introduce myself. We do have some new faces joining us today. So for those of you who haven't met me, my name is Devanshi Mathur. I am the marketing coordinator here at EduSmart. But today what I will be doing is be running the backstage. So I am the Robin to Paula Noe's Batman today. So I will be monitoring the chat box. So please ask all your most challenging questions. And at the end, when we have our Q&A session, I'll be channeling them through to Paula when time comes. And for all of you who have registered, tomorrow you will be receiving an email with a recording of today's presentation, as well as a copy of Paula Noe's slide deck and a handout she's created for all of us. If you are interested in receiving an attendance certificate, all you have to do is reply back to that email with how you would like your name written on your certificate, and I will get that for you. While I have your attention, we have 2 new webinars coming your way at the end of April, talking about CARES Act and the other education-related legislation. Lisa's on our call with us today, and we have Mark. Lisa will be speaking about EduSmart CARES, and in TEDx Talk, she'll be narrowing that conversation down to what legislation looks like, specifically in the state of Texas. So I will be forwarding that link to you as well in that email, but please check our website out to learn more about these webinars. For those of you who are new to EduSmart in itself, a little quick introduction. Since 2017, EduSmart has been passionate about supporting science teachers and students by providing standards-based content designed to engage students, help support teachers, and make learning science fun and memorable for all of our students. Our headquarters is here in Austin, Texas, so we support campuses all across Texas. And with the fearless leadership of Dr. Arlene Kaur, who's also on our call here, we are now in Florida as well. We serve over 1,000 campuses, over 250,000 students and teachers. We are constantly being improved to reflect the ever-changing demands of our teachers. Now, without much further ado, let me introduce the speaker of the hour, Paula Noe. Paula Noe is an experienced consultant who works with educational tech companies, regional service centers, districts, and campuses, focusing in the area of user interface and user experience, instructional coaching, and innovative professional development aligned to best practices. During her 21 years in education, she has served with the district Associate Superintendent's Office as instructional leader tasked with improving teacher and administrative effectiveness. She has served as a curriculum writer and a professional development presenter. And she is most known for her engaging presentation style. So please give your warmest round of applause to Paula Noe.
Hey, thank you so much for being here today. It is always exciting to be introduced by Devanshi. She makes you think like you're going to rock it. And I know I'm going to rock this presentation because this is an easy one. It's especially easy if you use EduSmart's products, but if you don't, I'm going to let you know a little bit about them along the way, because today we are going to talk about data responsive instruction. So data responsive instruction, it can mean a lot to different people, but we will flesh that out here shortly. Let's go over my overview. So anytime I present to teachers or to people in general, I always want to make sure that you feel well supported, dynamic, encouraged, and equipped to overcome any challenge that comes your way. And so that's still my goal for today. So as we move forward, let's talk about what it means to be data responsive instructed. And I think that comes down to the term of being explicit. I always like to start presentations out with a little joke or some sort of humor. And I completely agree with this cartoon that explicit literally means explicit. So either you have a plan or you don't have a plan, or you are data responsive or you're not data responsive. So I really want to try to get you on the data responsive train today, even if you're not, to start making some of those best practice choices. We're going to talk about taking small steps and large steps to closing gaps for students to become even more successful. So moving forward, I outlined 4 problems to solve as I see it. Number 1, always to me, where is the finish line? Followed closely by number 2, where am I in the race? Where I am right now. Number 3, what resources am I going to choose to use? Because we know that resources need to be closely aligned to what the students need to be able to do in order to hit the mark. And then last but not least, how am I going to maintain pace, rigor, and joy through this whole process? So let's talk about each of these 4 pieces. But first, here's a saying that I often put in front of teachers and principals, is that you can't think at higher levels until you understand the basics. And I think we would probably all agree that you can't analyze and synthesize information and apply information to an unknown situation until you understand the key basics to the concept. So let's talk about that briefly. Starting with number 1, where is the finish line? So my go-to easiest explanation from school district, school's office personnel, all the way down to a teacher assistant is simply this: let's master this website, Lead Forward. I think Lead Forward does a fantastic job on outlining the basic information for teachers to be able to have at their fingertips, to know and to understand specifically what they're held accountable for when it comes to their instruction. And then what are the testing tendencies and the question tendencies and patterns of the state? And then what can we expect when it comes to our assessment? And so I think that there's not a whole lot left to still uncover once you study these particular 3 documents on this website. So I have linked it here in the presentation for you at leadforward.com. And here are 3 examples of the documents that I think you need to know. The first one down here in the middle is a simple breakdown of the TEAC. It shows readiness and supporting. Readiness is marked in green, and all the supporting TEACs by grade level are marked in yellow. We know that the readiness standards are tested at a 70% level, and the supporting standards are tested at a 30% level. So it's super important that you master the readiness standards per grade level year as you move forward. And for us in 5th grade, as well as in 8th grade, that would include these supporting standards that actually help you level up in each of those grades. Now, when I look at this document at the top, it has every single TEAC that can be tested or that has been tested over the last 5 or 6 years. And it shows you the frequency that it is tested every year. And so you can get a feel for how often the state would test a particular standard. Why is that important? Well, you go back to how it affects your pacing. Once you realize the frequency of how often questions are asked according to reporting categories, then you can pace your instruction and your student touch points accordingly. And then the document here on the right is just simply a frequency summary table, which I love. And so what it's really going to tell you, for instance, in 5th grade, is that life science is super important. Super important. It makes up almost 1/3 of the test. So if you combined earth science and life science and 1 question on water cycle and 1 question on weather, you have just put together a package that will cover 70% of the state's assessment. So keep that in mind. These documents are very informative and they're very easy to read, and they're found at Lead Forward. So learning implications as we've moved forward, what do we need to know about these standards? This is what we need to know. The state tests our standards, not only with concepts, not only with vocabulary, but with visuals and applications. So super important that we also keep that in mind as we question our students formatively and summatively to check in with their understanding to see where they are in that learning process. Because remember, I said earlier, you can't get to application thinking until you've mastered the fundamentals of the concept. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So here's a touch point for us. Where are you now? So this is a second pillar of the presentation. Hopefully for you, you're going to be in a place right now that you're very data based. If you're not a problem, just need to get started. But if you are, then you have a lot of good information at your fingertips that you can spend some time with and create a plan off of. So let's talk about that. And then I'm going to ask some questions in the chat and I want to hear back from you. So what do I mean by this? Where are you now? Well, according to what we're held accountable for, what the students need to know and what the students need to be able to do with those standards that I just showed you from the Lead Forward website, I think that there are 5 levels of thinking. I think the very basic level question that our students get asked as far as checking for understanding is just a simple, straightforward question that will 9 times out of 10 have key vocabulary words in it. And if a student can get that question correct, then I say that that is a level 1 question. So kudos, but that's not where we need to end up. That's where we need to start. So let's ramp that up a little bit as we climb toward the hardest questions, which would be application questions or synthesis questions. A level 2 question can justify each of the answers as either right or wrong using key vocabulary and or a visual. So how would I know that? Well, I would simply look at the student work. Remember, I'm going to always tell you that at this point in the school year, and really all school year long, that you need to be grading what the students are writing. So yes, it is super important that they're talking a lot, absolutely, and that they are interacting with you verbally, absolutely. But at some point in the learning cycle, they need to be able to write their thinking down, and we need to be able to respond to the thinking, because that's how we ultimately are held accountable to check for understanding in the state of Texas and the state of Florida as well. So level 2 thinking, they can justify answers, whether right or wrong, and explain to us why correctly. So a level 3 thinking, going even higher, would be that the student can interpret images and justify all the answers correctly. And when I say interpret an image, I mean tell the story of the image inside the question, which poses the problem. And so if students are doing this correctly, you would see student work with outlining key vocabulary words. Let's just use the water cycle, for instance, that they would be labeling the key pictures on the graphic and that they would be showing arrows as it transitions from one stage of the water cycle to the next, adding the key vocabulary and phrases. A level 4 understanding would be that they can read and interpret data tables or data tables. And these, according to our most recent assessments, have not only been found in the question, but also in the question and in the answers. So it's a very, very difficult skill that needs to be taught all year long. And that would give you some representative information about their level of understanding, and that would be at a very high level. And then level 5 would be, according to me, that they can apply these concepts to an unknown situation and still get it correctly. So when I go back to what we are held accountable to in the state of Texas, it is according to these 3 words that are on the tip of every teacher's tongue: approaches, meets, and masters. So approaches is a very basic level of understanding and mastery that is not the finish line for any student in the state of Texas, but it enters into our conversation when our students are falling short of meets and masters. Meets would be an acceptable level of mastery and growth for all of our scholars. And then masters is really where we want our kids to be. So when I look at approaches, meets, and masters, as I apply my levels of understanding, you can see that I would probably categorize approaches that they can only handle level 1 and 2 questions. Meets can probably start handling level 3 and partially level 4 questions. And a master student can definitely handle level 4 and level 5 questions. And that's how you would distinguish and connect where your kids are in these paper assessments or these formative assessments or summative assessments, but where you have an assessment where the student has to provide written information, thinking on the paper, 3D to 2D, where they have to think out loud on the paper, and you take that data and you apply it towards those 3 standards: approaches, meets, and masters. So for your first question, let's see who is willing to share in the group. I'm looking forward to answering and making some responses to your feedback. I want to know your thoughts on these 5 levels, or I want to know where you're at as far as a comfort level. Let's say a letter A, which would mean that you're super comfortable with everything that I have said so far. Let's say a grade level of a C is that you're somewhat challenged and somewhat challenged by the information that I've presented and that you need to know more. And maybe a letter of D, which would mean I'm completely lost and just soaking up everything. So you can either grade yourself for me, and so I can respond to that, or you can let me know what your thoughts are on this slide. Where are you now?
Drum roll.
I know, there's always the pause. Always, always.
We have C. We have 1 C. Between an A and a C. I personally am at a D.
Okay.
A B, we've got a solid B. Yes.
There we go. Okay. Keep putting that information in the chat. Nobody has used the term ish so far, like a C-ish or, right? I just think that that's funny. So thank you so much for your transparency. I'm going to look at this and move forward. I like people being transparent with their thinking because I think that's the best way to personalize this training and to get the most out of it. So just remember that we're all on the same team. And if I can tailor my explanations to your needs, I will most certainly do so. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward with that information. So let's talk about this learning flow, level 2 learning flow. And what does it mean when I say group based on output data? So I think that you need to group your data based on a couple of things. Those 5 levels, let's just say group A's kids really are only performing at a level 1 and 2. They can only handle very basic questions. Group B's performance is really high level. They like mastering data tables, and they can show definitely application knowledge. So I think you need to group your kids according to how they're performing, but also think about grouping based on standard. Some kids just simply get it quicker than others. Some kids need more of a visual touch point. So not only grouping kids based on how they're performing so you can meet their needs, so you can gather kids from the bottom and push the kids at the top to clear up the middle, but also grouping your kids based on standard. And that's one thing that EduSmart is super, super fantastic about, because the ease of use of the product, it is broken down by standard. It's broken down with units and of visual literacy embedded into the story of the standard. It has simulations, activities, key application situations built in to the story of the standard as well as the learning activities. So it is really, really put together well and dovetails nicely with your skill set with driving first teach and then responding to students based on their data. So we'll look at that a little bit more closely here in a second. And then according to learning flow, I want you to make sure that you're grading what they're writing, not just what they're saying, but that the students can tell you the story of the standard. If they don't know that the water cycle is driven by the sun's energy, thermal energy over the ocean, then that is a gap in their understanding of the true steps and how a water cycle functions. And if they have a gap in that understanding, then they're not completely understanding what they're called to do, which is to understand what they need to know and what they need to be able to do with the water cycle. So that would come in refreshing your skills with the standards to make sure your students can hit the mark. Also, super important that kids make connections between key vocabulary words, concepts, and images. It's much like getting dressed in an outfit. Some of you may have heard me say this over time, that just because a kid can spout a word doesn't mean that he can get dressed in a concept. So there's some concepts that the key words go together, and that there are some concepts where we need to understand opposites. For instance, if I put out a word that says bounce, in fifth grade science, we're talking about a couple of standards. We're talking about force and motion, but we're probably talking about how light moves, right? Because it is bouncing off of a shiny surface. It's being reflected back to me. So a struggling student would know that bounce goes with reflection, which goes with shiny surface, which goes with a diagram of arrows hitting a surface and arrows coming back to the eye. So all those things would be one way that a child would process the standard. So that's what I mean by telling the story of the standard. And then it's always the teacher's responsibility to gather, to continue to draw up those lower performing kids that need more support, and then to lift the highest pieces and performers of their class in order to clear up the middle to create more space for more personalized time to be spent. So now let's look back at how I would do this in a classroom. So I'm a big fan of a weekly assessment form. This would be something that I would teach with, that would be in my hand or on my innovation station, or it would be by my computer if I'm doing remote instruction with my kiddos, because every time I'm checking in with them and I'm asking key questions, I'm collecting data. And it might be a plus, a check plus, a check, or a check minus, because that reminds me to come back and to circle back to touch base with these kids and these concepts. So I highly recommend that you create or you log some sort of information weekly with your students so you can see exactly where they are, and that you can overlay this with their weekly or biweekly assessments. So target questions, we talked about this and the reason for it. This is just another graphic that goes with that. So keeping in mind the 5 different layers or 5 different levels of questions. The only thing that's pulled out of here is that I think all scholars need to be justifying answers in the thinking on why it is correct and why it is not. So I went ahead and pulled that piece out for this particular graphic because I think it applies to every single one of them. Next, let's talk about simple but not easy. No, I'm not talking about your job, right? Because everybody says, teachers, you have such an easy job, simple job, and it's not either one of those, quite honestly, and definitely not during a pandemic year. But let's look at a few questions and what this information that can be gained from it for us. So here's a couple of simple questions I just put together. And you notice that they do not have ABCD choices attached to them. For this very reason, if I put this question in front of a child and he has nothing to say to me, then we're really performing at a level 0, not even a level 1, right? Because he doesn't know where to start. So I need to work with that scholar on having a point of attack and with the key vocabulary words in the question and with the visuals. So these questions are very, very telling. So I always have a mix between multiple choice and more open-ended questions. So simply put, which of the following organisms would most likely continue the flow of energy in this food chain? And so obviously I could get some wrong answers, which would be another point of conversation, but I could get some right answers as well. And so it's going to tell me a lot about background knowledge. If the child only has the same answer to answer every single question on a food chain, I know that they really don't have a plethora of experience and touch points with this concept. So I would need to broaden their visual practice and their vocabulary practice in order to attack the question. So obviously we're looking for something that's definitely a predator. So let's look at the next one. So if the number of frogs decrease, which organism will most likely increase? So I really like this question because it is two-part. It's not just a food chain interpretation, but we're actually talking about a scenario, a story inside the food chain. And we're talking about two words that are very simple words, but sometimes it's not so easy for the children to understand how the scenario plays out. So I tell my kids and my teachers that teach these concepts, you need to go visual with your kids. So if we're talking about frogs decreasing, that population decreasing, that means there's going to be fewer of them. And if we're talking about increasing, that means there's going to be more of them. And so we literally will move our hands up and down to make those connections inside of our brain. So I want to hear in the chat, what's one way or one strategy that you would use in order to reinforce learning on this particular standard with these types of questions, and what your thoughts are on these type of simple but not easy questions.
And now we wait. Paula, would you mind repeating the question again, please?
Yes. So give me a next level question, which will be, that's the explicit way to ask, or tell me what your thoughts are on using these types of questions. Either way you can answer. Give me a next level question. Or how could you use this one question that I have posed and ask another question from it, which is always very important to teachers, because that means I only had to hunt for one visual, but yet I can get 3 or 4 questions out of it.
I can feel everyone typing, so they're coming.
I know it. I know we have several probably listening in the car on the way home as well. So I'll just give a few more seconds. So Devanshi, why don't you go ahead and just let me know if something pops into there. I'm going to go ahead and continue. So anytime that you have a graphic, I really want you to leverage it forward and ask as many questions as possible. And so the higher order thinking skill is not just the order of transfer of energy inside of a food chain, but it is what happens to the population when we have a change, right? How is the food chain, or in 5th grade, ultimately the food web, affected by an environmental change? So that is the very higher order thinking skill that we need to get to. So moving on, here's another set of questions. I did add the ABCDs to this set of questions. And I see Jerry has a question. Devanshi, you want to read that to me, please?
Absolutely. Can you explain the relationship of amount of sunlight to the amount of frogs, snakes? So I'm assuming that is in response.
That was my answer. That was my answer to her question, actually.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so anytime you have students, and I'll say the teachers on the call right now are the students. Anytime you have your students create questions, that's definitely a higher order thinking skill. So it's a fantastic way for kids to be able to create questions to ask to their peers. It's definitely something that I've worked with some teachers over this year, building in discussions over such things, posing the question inside of a discussion post on an online module, and having other kids ask and answer questions inside of one student's food chain. So it's pretty powerful. let's move on. Look at this particular question. Which organism in the diagram is both a predator and a prey? Anytime we use this word both, it signifies a higher thinking load. So both, not, except are all super powerful ways. And then we align this with organisms A, B, C, and D, making sure that they can label correctly. And then last but not least, an application question over Hurricane Katrina. Devanshi, can you read that for us, please?
Absolutely. Hurricane Katrina devastated the coast of Louisiana. Many ecosystems were affected by the storm. The storm surge brought saltwater to freshwater habitats, resulting in the death of some vegetation. How will this affect the animals living in this coastal area in the future?
Right. So a very straightforward question, but it's definitely not an easy question because it introduces a lot of vocabulary that could, by chance, not have been taught. So coastal could be a new word for some of your scholars, freshwater or habitat, hopefully not, but it could be a new word for your scholars. Vegetation is a higher order word, but there's enough key information inside of the story for the kids to come up with the right answer. But I love how we ask the question here, how will this affect the animals living in the future? So they have to understand sentence 2 and 3 inside of here in order to predict that answer. So a super powerful question, but very straightforward. And then obviously we're very familiar with this question in the state of Texas. Not too many words in the question, but then it plays out the story with the visuals. And then we have some data tables as answer choices. So something that EduSmart does that's beautiful, that I referred to earlier, is the use of visual literacy throughout their learning modules. I have noticed great improvement in my teachers' ability to be able to communicate information because they have been tutored, so to say, by EduSmart, because they have partnered with EduSmart, and EduSmart has actually upped their game because the teachers have been able to buy back their time, not hunting for visuals, but yet leveraging the visuals on the screen from the different modules or simulations or activities, and clicking the pause button and stopping and asking higher order questions based on those visuals. Super important, because we know there's only so much time in the day, but the simple use of these stories and these instructional modules being completely aligned to the standards gives teachers great peace of mind when it comes to using the products to sharpen their skills in front of their kids. So just as I said, EduSmart, I think, provides one of the biggest lifts out of all the products out there, because it combines not only the instructional modules, but you can see as the screenshot that I put here on the bottom, they put the just right key vocabulary words on the page along with the storyline, and then they stop and ask the children to do something. So they're formatively asking questions throughout this product. So super important, super powerful, all at a teacher's fingertips in order to figure out how you would best use this with your kids. I've seen campuses use it as first teach. I've seen campuses use it as a small group instruction. I've seen campuses use it as a data responsive plan. So all across the board, it's one of the most agile products on the market. And that's why I'm such a fan. So concepts, vocabulary, visuals, charts, and applications. So moving forward, last but not least, how are you going to be able to maintain a system that promotes pace, rigor, and joy? I often liken pace to a cog train, or a gear inside of an engine or a mechanical device, because that gear is going to move at the pace of the instructor. And I like my teachers being able to set the pace and to set the expectation, because one thing we know for sure is that kids will rise up if a teacher has high expectations. And if a teacher does not have high expectations, the students will definitely meet that as well. So just know that you are probably one of the most important people in that kid's lives. And by setting high expectations, you're opening up their future to hearing the word yes quite a bit, that yes, they have the ability and the skills to do what they want to do. So be strategic. Pace also means for me, follow a schedule, because then it doesn't become an emotional decision and we don't simply lose instructional time because we're going to hold ourselves accountable for short increments of time. And then we are going to release the responsibility to the children to do the learning. I'm not going to do the talking for them, and I'm not going to do the writing for them, but I am the support. I am the instruction and I am the support, but they are the ones that are going to be the doers. And in the end, they are going to be the ones that are going to be the learners. So in the middle, we're going to talk about rigor. Rigor always breeds confidence. It's in that release of responsibility. And what does it look like from a teacher? Rigor to me looks like being prepared for next level questions. And if you can't think of them off the cuff, no worries. The only shame in your game is if you haven't sketched them out on a slip of paper and you're not holding your paper. So that's what I tell my teachers, is that it takes a lot of years of studying and sharpening your skills to be excellent at something. So if you haven't quite arrived, just study up, write your questions down, so you'll be prepared to challenge these kids regardless of your content knowledge. And then lastly, how are you planning to show joy and your high expectations, and how are you planning to celebrate the learning and the growth that's happening in your kids? So there's nothing more fun than to celebrate with your teacher and to celebrate with your buddies. And so I'm a big fan of competition. I'm a big fan of gaming. I'm a big fan of celebrating and thematic units. So whether you're going to play Survivor with your kids, or whether you're going to be game like, or you can create a Minecraft competition out of this and they can level up or acquire certain pieces of equipment used for Minecraft. I'm just thinking off the top of my head on what's important to kids. And I do know that 80% of our kids are in the Minecraft space. How can you connect what you need them to do in order to get them to something that they really love and really like to talk about? So don't be afraid to think outside the box and show that energy and that thematic expression. And lastly, you make the call when it comes to reteach and review. And so what's the big difference between these two? Reteaching is missing conceptual understanding. And I outlined some simple bullet points there for you. And the big word that I would say is just disconnect. There is a disconnect between concepts and their answers. And so I will leave it at that. When we talk about review, there is a disconnect with extension and application when it comes to different plausible outcomes, that there's not a disconnect between the initial logic, but it's in the application. So my personal opinion is that if they need to be retaught, that is done very, very visually and tied to key vocabulary and strategies on how to break down the understanding. And if you simply need to review, it is about telling the story of the standard and practicing that application in front of the students and with the students. And I think they close that learning gap rather quickly when you're that targeted and that explicit about your plan. So just know that when I look at this visual, I often think of Tiger Woods in a golf tournament on Sunday. And everybody knows that if Tiger Woods is still in the golf tournament on Sunday, he's got a strong chance to win. And so that's how I see creating data portfolios or data profiles on your students based on concepts, because I think that that keeps your instruction in short account and very quick response to what the child is doing, so we can correct any errors quickly and get them moving in the right direction to a master's level. And that's Tiger in his master's shirt there with the red shirt on, doing the fist pump, because when you're performing at that level, you need to be celebrated. So If you think you have time, I would tell you, you might not have a lot of time, but you do have some time. So now's the perfect time to be forming the plan on what your plan is going to be, on how you're going to respond to your students' data. Where are your students? Creating these data profiles and lining it up to your plan, and then making sure you have the just right resources to pull it off. Most people in the state of Texas have less than 4 weeks when it comes to this assessment. So make sure that you know exactly when you are due to be assessed based on your campus and state location. Super important that you know where the finish line is. And we're going to finish with this video.
Connect to the energy around you.
I kind of just want to learn the Cobra thing.
Cobra takes a lifetime. It requires great focus.
But I have great focus. Oh my God. Miss Han?
Your focus needs more focus.
So I always think that our focus needs more focus, and that's exactly what data responsive instruction does. It's also exactly what EduSmart does, is it focuses on the just right things, supports them, much like your instruction does. And then all of that bridged together inside of your relationship and your professional input when it comes into the instruction for children is what makes us the most powerful profession on the planet. So thank you so much for giving me the chance to visit with you today. Thank you for being an educator. Thank you for doing what you do. And I want to open it up for questions. Devanshi, there you go.
Thank you so much, Paula. While people are writing in their questions, thank you so much, Paula, for presenting with us today. I know I've been looking forward to this topic for a while, and I'm sure many of us do. I know a lot of people are going to be watching this video all throughout the week and up to our assessment seasons. So thank you so much for presenting for us today. We really, really appreciate it. With that, do we have any questions for Miss Paula Noe? Your hardest questions, let's bring them. Someone wrote down, when you were talking about in process, what can you elaborate on what does releasing responsibility mean?
Releasing responsibility means a couple of things to me. So let me just model for you. It never fails that even some of my master teachers will question like this. So Devanshi, do you understand? Do you get it? Devanshi goes, I get it. I'm good. I'm good. My focus does not need focus. And I'm going to say, as the instructor, are you sure? And she's going to say, yeah, I'm good. And I'm going to say, okay, that's not release of responsibility. And that doesn't tell me anything other than Devanshi was not ignoring me. That's all that tells me. And that she's very respectful and wants to give me some sort of an answer. So release of responsibility means is that I set up the question and the learning intention and I let it go. And there is going to be some awkward space there. There's going to be 7 seconds of awkward. And you can sentence stem a child to a certain point, but then you need to let them have it and let them struggle. And I call it a progressive struggle. It's much like doing double Dutch jump rope. The only way you're going to get better is if there is quiet space and you're forced to make connections and to answer questions. And I am there to support you and to pull you forward into that mastery of understanding. But if the child knows that they are not going to have to answer a question, that the teacher will answer the questions if they wait long enough, then the child will not participate. They will not write. So if you continue to grade things that they don't write, they're going to write even less and less. So I am saying a release of responsibility has an expectation, which you set as a teacher, on what is going to be acceptable. And so I remind my students and my teachers of this all the time, is that this question, and I will model for them, this is what good looks like. It's an answer. It's a quick write. I need a 4-sentence explanation and I need a picture with these 3 vocabulary words labeled on the picture. Don't forget about that. And so I will role play with them, and I will show them what good looks like, and then I will show them what needs improvement looks like. And they will help me edit my subpar answer and make it master level. And kids love doing that. They love critiquing other people's work. So let them do it, because what they're doing is editing and refining my thinking process, but in a safe way. So I would set them up for success that way. And then I will release it to them to do the thinking at high levels. And when they don't hit it, I'm not going to say it's good enough. I'm going to say, well done. If it's well done, I'm going to say well done. And then I'm going to say, but what happens if I ask this question? You're at a level 14. Can we go to, here's a level 15 question. And so I make up these arbitrary numbers because they're very disarming. Nobody wants, everybody can figure out red light, yellow light, green light. Everybody can figure that out. But when you start talking about, wow, that was like a level 30 answer, nobody knows what that really means. But then when you ask for a level 40 answer, they know what that means. So that's what I mean by release of responsibility. Grading what they write, not talking all the time, but talking just enough, and then releasing it to them and putting them on the hook for the doing, helping support the learning, refining that process, letting them continue to redo, refine the process, redo, and then celebrate and move on. So that's how I would describe it in 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Paula. I appreciate that. And she writes, thank you back. So thank you so much for that. I feel like I understood that a lot better too. So thank you. We have a few more minutes left. We got one more question here. Is there a correlation between the levels of questions and the DOK levels?
Not a direct correlation, but it's just a best practice correlation. It's something that I've used in a large urban district and that I have presented across the country with, that it's been super successful for me and in the mathematics space as well. So I know it works. It's not directly correlated to the DOK levels, but I think it's close enough. It just makes sense that if you can only pick the right answer and you can't tell me why the other 3 answers are wrong, that you really, it's sketchy whether you're going to get it right the next time or not, because you don't understand it at a grassroots level enough to justify your thinking. So it is just so rhythmical in that climbing up of Bloom's taxonomy, that I think that it's important that you not take it for granted, the extra work that is necessary in order to break down a question that way. And the upside to doing it that way, I will say in closing, is that when you find a good question like that and kids take the time and dissect the question and then justify each of the answers and draw a model and label it, you know a lot about that child's thinking on that particular question. So I would count that question as a super powerful question. And when you have these super powerful questions, you don't need as many questions. So it's not death by questioning when it comes to test prep or making sure that we've checked in with end of course assessments and we've hit our mark when it comes to not creating gaps based on our instruction. It's super important that we not just throw 98 questions at them. It's not an endurance thing. It's a quality thing, right? It's a quality thing. And I think definitely the state of Texas has noticed that. And over the years, they've started to reduce the number of questions that we ask. But I think the level of rigor of the questions has really jumped. So we're asking harder, higher level questions, but the number of questions have dropped. And so I would mirror that practice inside my classroom as well.
Thank you, Paula. And thank you for the question. That was a great question. We are almost out of time. Do we have any more questions for Paula? If not, you can catch Paula. Her contact information will be on her slide deck. There we go. Thank you, Paula. So if you have any questions for Paula or for any of us here on the EduSmart team, you have our information. By all means, please call, please email us with all your questions, and we will love to start a conversation with you. Again, all of you will be receiving a copy of today's recording in your email tomorrow, as well as information about our upcoming webinars. But in our last moments, do we have any more questions for our team here? I think that's it then. Again, Paula, thank you so much for presenting for us today. Thank you everyone for joining us, for engaging with us, and for all of your wonderful questions. From all of us here on the EduSmart team, have a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Everybody.